So in respect for everyone's time, we'll get started now. I'm delighted to welcome you to Expanding Your Vision for Third-Party Risk Management in Healthcare and Life Sciences. This is a live on ServiceNow webinar in our community. I do have to quickly go over the safe harbor notice on any forward-looking statements. We try to be very, very transparent in these webinars and give you as much information and content as we can. So if there's anything forward-looking, we want to make sure that you understand that things could change, and there are risk factors that we cannot guarantee that we achieve all plans, but our intentions and our expectations are what you see displayed in this webinar. So let's move on to a little bit more housekeeping. There are a variety of different webinars and meetups that we offer in the Live and ServiceNow community, and they're really interactive event series that we offer. So definitely feel free to ask questions, join the chat, and be as interactive as possible. We do have everyone placed on mute, but we have saved time at the end for Q&A. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions along the way. We'll try to address anything throughout the presentation, but we'll definitely try and address your questions at the end. If we don't get time to answer questions, we will follow up with folks. If you'd like to send your email address privately for any follow-up that you need, if there's any details that you missed or you would be interested in. But if you do miss anything, the presentation is going to be recorded and shared on the ServiceNow community shortly after the event. And when you do close out of the webinar, you'll be prompted for a short survey. And we thank you for your feedback as we use this information to drive our content moving forward. Today's agenda, we're going to get a little bit of introductions, understand who Jay and Shannon are. We'll talk about some trends in third-party risk. We'll talk about what's new in the third-party risk management offering that ServiceNow has, including a demo. And as I said, we'll get to as many questions as possible. So as we get started, I would like to introduce you to Jay and Shannon. Jay Dials is the Managing Director of Agile, who delivers strategic cybersecurity risk management services to the Fortune 500 as an elite ServiceNow partner. In this role, Jay serves as a trusted advisor to CISOs within healthcare, financial services, energy, retail, and other industries by aligning security and risk to everyone's individual unique strategies, goals, and challenges. Jay has been with Agile for more than a decade, leveraging his master's in engineering management to bring a level of confidence and understanding to each engagement that he helps to meet the increased pressure of cybersecurity risks and industry regulation shifts, while enabling organizations to integrate cloud environments with integrated risk management solutions. So welcome, Jay. Also joined today is Shannon Long. As you may know, she is the face of our outbound she's the face of our outbound product management team as a principal outbound product manager for our risk business team at ServiceNow. Shannon is an authority on all of our risk products, often working with analysts and customers to help them understand the significance of recent enhancement or what's coming in our roadmap. As a prior consultant for one of the Big Four, Shannon knows firsthand how to manage strategic risk programs, leveraging the products we deliver, and is often looked to for insight on how to best utilize these solutions across varied organizations. I'll pass this over to Jay, if you'd like to talk about some of our third-party risk trends that you're seeing in the market today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Roz. So we've got 5 key trends that we're going to touch on that we've witnessed in a lot of our healthcare and life sciences customers. So we're going to talk about what we're calling return to business as usual, touch on a focus that we're seeing around user experience, how clients are looking to streamline their assessments, various levels of automation they're bringing to their process, and how ultimately they're achieving continuous monitoring. So we jump into the first one around business as usual. So we're starting to see a lot of our customers return to kind of pre-pandemic ways of doing some of their programs. They're finally getting out from under a lot of the pandemic-induced supply chain disruption, and they're starting to work through a backlog of assessments and reassessments. So specifically in healthcare and life sciences, there was a big focus on getting vendors and third parties onboarded as quickly as possible to either rectify a disruption or as part of kind of the expanding scope and stress that the organization was under. As a result, they may have overexpanded their inventory, and a lot of clients are looking to consolidate their inventory through kind of preferred third-party programs, or maybe they are able to, get discounts and find ways to find efficiencies in their overall program. And then the last thing we're seeing is actually a return to on-site assessments for some of those critical third parties. This was a technique that a lot of clients would leverage for maybe that top, 1 or 2% of the third parties that they were focusing on. Usually they're large hosting providers, those who had a lot of data on those specifically, for their organization. So these are things that we are starting to see in the industry as things begin to return to normal. The next area we're starting to see a lot of movement on is user experience. I would say willful participation of the business is paramount for success in third-party risk assessments within the organization. And with our prior point where the emphasis was on onboarding these folks as quickly as possible so that we can continue our day-to-day operations and recover from disruptions, the business has become used to kind of ad hoc processes. And so we want to make sure they're following our ServiceNow enabled processes as best as possible. And ways to do that are improved integration between those related processes. So the procurement, the third-party risk management programs, third-party performance management programs, and making sure that from a business stakeholder perspective, it feels seamless. They go in through the same front door, regardless of whether they're looking for a supplier who's providing maybe medical supplies versus an information technology third party. And then simplification of the onboarding. Onboarding and assessment process is part of that as well. So leveraging techniques like virtual agent. We've had clients who've implemented virtual agents as the means to not only take in the onboarding request, but also ask them some of the inherent risk questionnaires so that from an end user perspective, it's very clean and straightforward. Similarly, we could look at dedicated portals, well-crafted notifications and workspaces. Those notifications sometimes can be make or break in terms of whether this process runs smoothly. So making sure that it's very clear what we're asking of the business, giving them the ability to respond through those email notifications can really expedite the process. In terms of expediting the process, we also need to think about how do we streamline assessments. A lot of our clients have realized that third parties are becoming extremely fatigued with third-party risk assessments, and they're looking for ways to improve the participation of the third parties. And they do that through leveraging standardized assessments where appropriate. With the ServiceNow third-party risk management solution, the shared assessment, standardized information gathering questionnaire, oftentimes referred to as SIG, is part of the solution. There's even capabilities that allow the third party to import a previously completed version of that. So leveraging that where able can certainly improve the response time from these third parties, as well as using kind of smart targeted questionnaires or supplemental questionnaires that can help reduce the number of questions that are posed to them. Oftentimes, if they're presented with 300 questions, they're not going to be very happy with you, and the odds that they actually want to respond are limited as well. So that's a big part of that. And you can do that through those inherent risk questionnaires, understanding the services that are being provided to the organization. My example earlier around, are they providing supplies versus IT services? There are different questions, different risk areas that we need to consider based on those services. And then leveraging risk intelligence from third-party integrations like a MasterCard Risk Recon or BitSight or others can help expedite this process. Speaking of expediting the process, automation is key. Reducing that end-to-end assessment timeline helps organizations make smart decisions on whether to move forward with a third party or not. And there are a lot of ways the clients have started to leverage automation. And that's inclusive of those third-party monitoring services that I mentioned, but also building out event-based workflows. So if we're using something like a MasterCard Risk Recon and their score drops below a certain level, triggering whether we want to do a reassessment, whether we want to notify the business of this, making sure that we're taking the right actions. And then also looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities. So we've had clients who have built out document review capabilities where they're actually able to look at something like a SOC 2 report and identify any qualified opinions or exceptions that were noted in these documents, which can help with the processing and review of that information. And then the last piece that we have here in terms of trends is around continuous monitoring. We're finding that our clients are no longer satisfied with the once every 12, 24, 36-month assessment frequency and want to have more continuous monitoring of their third parties. And they're doing that through a variety of techniques that's inclusive of managed service capabilities to help allow for higher volume of third-party reassessments. They're looking at like assessment exchange capabilities where these services are taking in assessments from commonly used vendors. They're doing the back and forth with the third party, and they're providing it to you as a validated assessment. And that can be used in lieu of some of those direct assessments that you may do with the third party. And then starting to leverage multiple external monitoring services. So each of them has their own strengths, and some are focused on different types of risks. So aggregating this information can really help us have a clear view on what we expect for our third parties and kind of what that risk looks like. So in summary, we have just a quick overview of those. So return to business as usual. Clients are working through those backlogs, consolidating their inventories, and resuming on-site assessments. Big focus on user experience. A clean and intuitive experience ensures involvement and engagement from your business stakeholders. Streamlined assessments improve your third-party response rates. Automation can help reduce the manual effort and reduce the time to complete these assessments, which your business will be happy about. And then lastly, more frequent reassessments and external monitoring services can give us a continuous monitoring and improved understanding of risk. I'll pause there, Shannon. Any thoughts from your side? I know that there's a lot there. It's kind of our view from the outside. I think a lot of these are what you're seeing as well from your point of view.
Oh, absolutely. The return to business as usual, that sort of happened overnight, right? We all got very comfortable being remote, and then, the next day, okay, let's all go back. So the resilience component of that is so important, because there's not only risk with that quick turnaround, but then also how you expand that turnaround, that working style to your third parties, and even adopt their current organizational policy around working from home, working remote, working at the office. So we definitely are seeing that quick turnaround back to, pre-2020 between our customer base as well as the third parties that they encounter. And then, Jay, I think the streamlined assessment, the assessment fatigue is such a loud trend. And I know that when I've spoken to our customer base, the biggest question or elephant in the room is, how can I use generative AI to help eliminate or bring down the number of questions asked? And so it's something that, the overall goal of eliminating that assessment fatigue, but then how can we bring in emerging tech to improve that as well? So definitely having a lot of asks, and it's definitely a theme from a roadmap perspective on how we use some of that great innovation. But I know the big ask around assessments is, how can I still get the granularity of the data I need without having my third parties answer 300 questions, right? So a lot of different opportunities for innovation there and streamlined support from the assessment side, but it's definitely a very, very large theme and vocal theme that we're hearing from our customers.
Absolutely. So it's balancing your desire to understand the risk as much as possible with the third party's willingness to respond. Some of that starts as early as contracting and making sure that you have very clear guidelines in terms of your right for them to complete those assessments and to gather that information. So often third parties try to weasel out of it. And so having that sort of top level governance is the first step to making sure that you get those, but then having assessments that are streamlined and simplified as much as possible also helps.
Right.
To that end, Shannon, there was a question that came in talking about the number of risk domains that needed to be assessed. Is a great challenge for folks on the phone. So when you're going through the demo, if you can talk about some of the streamlining and automation and when and where AI might help manage that volume, that'd be great.
Yeah, I can speak to that for sure. All right. So
Excellent.
are we ready to move on to what's new?
I think so.
Okay, let's do it. So, for those of you on the phone, you've heard, you've seen why the switch from vendor risk management to third-party risk management. And ultimately, what is the difference? And so, as vendor risk management has been a product in the risk portfolio for a long time, we released the first version in 2017. That term vendor to our broader customer base really only accounts for one type of third party, right? The third party ecosystem can consist of vendors, suppliers, contractors, partners, consultants, customers, even. Ultimately, the third party is any external relationship which could expose risk on behalf of the organization. And so we at ServiceNow wanted to, as we've grown quickly outside of just being an IT solution, we're pushing into the enterprise platform capabilities. The risk product is pushing into enterprise risk, corporate compliance. Our third party solution needed to be the same. And so the release of the third party risk management solution is not just a rename. As you can see, we've enhanced the capabilities quite a bit, but the name change also allows adoption of terminology across organizations, as well as our approach to allowing our customers to not only house their most critical vendors, suppliers, third parties, but all of them. Wrap your arms around your entire ecosystem and then understand, based on the level of risk that relationship and even that service being provided by the third party holds, to manage the ones that are the most critical while still having insight into some of those lower risk third parties. And so the third party risk management application was built on the vendor risk management application. So all of the capabilities you know and love in VRM still exist in third party risk management, but we've opened up the architecture and the flexibility to allow housing of any flavor of third parties. And then we've, of course, enhanced those VRM capabilities. And I'll call those out here in the next couple of slides. But ultimately, moving forward, our investment and our focus will be on third-party risk management to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our customers and that all of those external relationships can be housed, monitored, managed on the platform. So when we get into what exactly are those enhancements, I'll start with probably the most anticipated, and that's within the third-party risk management application, an end-to-end due diligence workflow. So a workflow outlining the activities of ultimately the life cycle of the third party, from initiating, onboarding, or even renewal straight from the employee center, and I'll talk about the employee center in a few slides, to performing that inherent risk questionnaire, so that internal decision around how much risk, controls out of the way, policies out of the way, how much risk is this third party, and then specifically the engagement or the service being provided, how much risk are we taking on internally at the organization? So a touch different from your tiering, where you just got that holistic vendor score, tiering score, if you will. The IRQ actually is configured in a way that, based on the responses of that questionnaire internally, there will be automation around what risk assessments need to be sent externally. And that is one avenue of defining the areas of risk needing to be assessed or responded to by your third parties. So there's good automation there and lots of flexibility in configuring that IRQ based on the flavor of third party, but then also the triggers around sending that external assessment, which is the next phase in the workflow. The external assessment, which is answered by your third parties through the third party portal. And then, of course, a level of review and approval, and then great integrations with our other products like procurement service operations, like legal service delivery around the contract risk being defined throughout the contract review and approval process. And then the last stage, of course, is certified offboarding of those third parties, or renewal and reinitiation of the workflow. So the workflow creates an umbrella of management of this process, but also allows for really quick reporting and even transparency to the first line. If a first line individual requests the onboarding of a new third party, they now have continuous insight into what state, what status that third party is in, and when they can officially begin the work with that third party. The next capability within TPRM, an enhanced reporting visualization, if you will. And if you've seen our BCM global map, this probably looks very similar, but this is specific to your third parties. So you can plot globally where your third parties sit, and then even get a bit more granular into the level of engagement if you've defined a data center that is dependent on a service by that third party, or even fourth parties. You can see where that risk sits globally, and it really helps with prioritizing the understanding of, okay, would there be any external weather events in that given location? Would that disrupt the supplier supplying me with healthcare supplies to a given hospital or to a given doctor's office? And then it also helps with regulations. So many of the regulations that we are all aiming to be compliant with are location-based, specifically around the privacy right now. So having this quick view into where they all sit, where there's work being done, really gives you quick insight into any upcoming events or any regulations that might need to be addressed based on the location. So next, Employee Center. So as you all are probably aware, the Employee Center was released, I think, about 2 releases ago, and that's ultimately the single entry point into the platform for internal folks. So we run it at ServiceNow. It's where I go to either submit training or to request a new application on my computer. And so the Employee Center for our customers integrate with all of the different applications on the platform. And so an end user can request advice from the compliance team. They can submit their goals for HR, or they can request third-party due diligence. So it's natively integrated into the Employee Center. And as I mentioned, allows anyone in the organization to initiate that process of an engagement with a third party. With the Employee Center as well and the IRQ process, the respondent of that inherent risk questionnaire will typically be the individual who is the main stakeholder, the main point of contact with that third party. So their response and insight into the inherent risk of this engagement is so important. And so they too, if assigned an IRQ questionnaire, can easily submit their responses straight from the Employee Center. So no emails or spreadsheets. It can all be submitted and pop back over to the third-party risk management team with ease. Last, and this is a big one and new for TPRM, is out-of-the-box content. So within VRM, you probably know we always supported the SIG, and we updated that annually. And the SIG will remain in VRM as well as in TPRM. But in TPRM, the third-party risk management engineering team did a wonderful job and a lot of research and development around populating available content to be used within your IRQ questionnaire or within your external risk assessment. And so these out-of-the-box content questions, there's about 60 in total, 7 specific to the IRQ process, 53 specific to the various areas of risk to be responded to by your third parties. And so the research and development of these questionnaires focused in on regulations, on geos, and on certain industries. And with each release, we'll continue to bulk up this library of out-of-the-box content. And it can be used in a way where you can pick and choose some of these questionnaires to cultivate your own unique assessment, or you can use what's available out of the box. But again, this content can be automatically triggered based off of the IRQs. It can be updated You can even have your own set of questionnaires, but sprinkle in some of the out-of-the-box content. It's very much up to you, your organization, and how you assess internally as well as externally. But definitely a great new addition to the product with third-party risk management, because we know content, as Jay is very familiar with creating content, as his team actually does that and feeds the platform. It's a job in itself to understand, am I asking the right question? Am I getting the right insights that I need?
No, absolutely. I think our team's been incredibly excited by these new capabilities and the content that's being provided with the third-party risk management solution, Shannon, because as you said, this can be a full-time job in and of itself for organizations to come up with this, and giving clients a starting point on a lot of these different topics, and then being able to go and kind of modify them to fit to their specific needs is huge.
Agreed. So I think, Roz, let me double check here. But yeah, we're ready for the demo. But do we want to pause for questions before I jump in?
There were only a couple of things that came in that one was, do I need to assess each separate engagement record for each location?
You don't need to. I guess, to put it simply. So with the route of engagements, we did that because the risk of just the relationship level doesn't always give the amount of insights into those various areas. And I always think about, Roz, you mentioned I used to be at a Big Four, and I was always implementing, but the risk of me having admin access implementing ServiceNow is much different than the team from my same company who is outsourcing the internal audit function, right? Those are two very different areas of risk. And so within a given third party, you can have different engagements, and it's up to you in which you perform. If, say, you perform your IRQ, one of those engagements is an incredibly low risk engagement, maybe you don't submit that external relationship and you monitor it, or maybe you do, and the cadence in which you assess that specific engagement is longer than for the implementation team who has admin access to your ServiceNow platform and can see all that data, right? So you definitely don't. There's flexibility in how you define the IRQ scoring and the cadence or frequency around that external assessment. But the engagement really brings power and just granularity of what all that third party is doing for you or supplying you.
And then the following question,
think,
which is the right answer, you do need to put the separate engagement records in to show those locations on the new criticality map. Yes. They're based on location. So if you wanted to have your risk concentration really mapped out globally, then you would need to have the separate engagement posted.
Jay, was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Nope, I think that's been addressed.
Okay, I'm sorry for the dog.
And maybe just for, I see a question and also just about how to modify some of those, content that's being provided for IRQ and others. There are the abilities to copy those over, so you can leave intact the version that ServiceNow is providing, and you can start to tailor those. And there's also capability to kind of import through Excel. So as folks start to build out their own inventory of IRQs and targeted assessments, there's a lot of great functionality to allow you to do that in a kind of program administrator capacity.
Yeah.
And there's someone who raised a hand. So Nicole, you raised a hand. I didn't know if you wanted to contribute to the conversation. And I guess you're muted, so I don't know if you can. If you could put something in the Q&A, that would be super helpful.
And I was actually just typing away there. Natasha asked a question around the education and now learning. And I actually met with we refer to them as TACO, Training and Certification Organization. And they are in the finalized process of updating all the Vancouver training. So that will be released, I believe, mid-November, but TPRM training will be available as part of that release. So we'll still, of course, have the VRM learning path, but TPRM going forward will be the most recent released content.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I'm seeing quick follow-up to the separate engagement question. Is it possible to assign multiple locations for a specific vendor? James, that's a great question. At the third-party level, it is one location, but the engagement allows for a differing location from your third party specific to that service being provided. The third party record, as you might be aware, is a shared record on an underlying platform table. And hence, for data governance, defining one location, sharing that across the organization, but then giving the third party risk management team the freedom and flexibility to define other locations at the engagement level. All right, well, with that, I'm going to make sure I'm still logged into my instance, but let's take a look at what third-party risk management comes with from a user experience perspective. So, Roz and Jay, if you could just confirm that you're able to see my instance.
Yep.
We are.
Okay, good deal. So third-party risk management does come with workspaces, persona-based, whether you're the third-party risk manager, third-party risk analyst. This look will change depending on the hat you wear at the organization. We called out previously in this webinar, integrations with other ServiceNow products. So just know that this workspace still does integrate with vendor performance management, and that lives within ITSM, and that's why we haven't changed the full name of the workspace yet, because they didn't change to third-party risk performance. And so we share this workspace, and if vendor performance management was turned on, you'd see a tab here around the performance metrics being captured of your third parties. So just wanted to level set there. So the workspace, you still have your home page outlining operational and important metrics around your total third parties, number of engagements, what the current risk score of those are. You get into overarching metrics around the risk rating by the third parties, the top risk areas, based on the completion of those external third-party risk assessments and the responses there, and then getting into any issues, and then fourth-party management. The newest addition is going to be the due diligence homepage. So there's a separate tab all around the due diligence process. You're able to see all active due diligence processes, where they sit in the workflow. And as you scroll down, getting into aging and then engagement aging as well. So we're going to drill into a due diligence record here in a second, but just to continue walking through the workspace, you then have a dedicated home page to risk activity. So again, if I had vendor performance on that home page, would show both risk and performance attributes being captured. This homepage is dedicated to the risk activity, any open assessments which need to have a follow-up, any issues which need to be remediated in collaboration with your third parties, any tasks around document requests, all that will live here. And then you get into some operational tracking and even some upcoming expiration of your third-party risk assessments. Next, I'll get into that risk concentration map. So you have two levels of viewing the map, one at the highest level, your third-party level. But if you drill in, I'll drill into Adobe here. And I apologize for the guest appearance by the dog. He really loves talking about third-party risk management. So you get to see at the relationship level and then drill into your specific areas of engagement. And so that will bring you to that location of this engagement, service, product being provided, and some contextual data there. And so if I click over into service outsourcing, that's an example of, based on the engagement, different locations, but all bundling up under Adobe for this given example. Next homepage is going to be tasks. I would hope I'm assigned none, but within the workspaces, as you might know, the theme across all is have the consolidated task page. So you can easily see your queue of work by category of task, by state of task, to be able to work through your given activities and always have that consolidated view. And then, of course, if you appreciate the list view that was provided in UI 16, we still have that option to be able to look through the data in the list views. But I'm going to drill in to a due diligence record just to give you all a look and feel of what that consists of, what data is mapped. And so as you saw there, when I clicked into the specific workflow stage, this due diligence process list updated for me. And I'll click into a due diligence record. And you can see here details being captured, a lot being pulled from that parent third party, which I'll show you that record here shortly. But here is going to be your IRQ. Here are going to be your external risk assessments sent based on the outcome of the IRQ. You then can even get to the granular level with your risk intelligence providers to be directing scoring to the specific engagements, not just at your third party level. And then, of course, approvers and levels of approvers. So I'm going to click up into an engagement. And this is where you can see the overall scorecard, who the contacts are, what the business service is, any of those tiering assessments. If you're still using tiering assessments in conjunction with IRQs, completely an organizational decision there. But again, a lot of map data, and you're able to see the due diligence requests and workflows associated to this given engagement. Last area I'll show is going to be at the highest level, your overall third party overview. And I call this out because we've made some enhancements in the visualization, specifically around the third party risk intelligence providers. My internet might not be working with us this morning, but this will give you insight into the aggregation of scoring from those given engagements. You're able to define the components and the weighting. So how much of the risk assessment we want to bring into the score, how much of the given engagements, how much external monitoring all comes in, or all part of the overall risk rating, what risk areas are being captured for this given third party. And then getting into our intelligence providers and what their current ratings are. So based on your relationship with these organizations, and we have quite a bit available on the store, it will feed the platform with continuous monitoring, continuous scoring. But of course, the platform then normalizes that input to be able to be included in your unique third-party risk scoring. And then, of course, operational tracking against the highest level, your third party. So I'll pause there. Any questions I can answer around the demo or around what you're seeing?
Yep,
Yeah.
questions came in. So can you include documentation requests such as capturing a SOC 2 within TPRM?
Yes, great question. And yes, so part of the external risk assessment, as you're cultivating not only the questionnaire, you can also cultivate the initiation of document requests. And so that can be of SOC 2, maybe it's your sustainability report, whatever it might be. As they answer those assessment questionnaires, when they get to the section around document requests, they can upload that documentation and it's sent back to the third-party risk management team to review.
Great. Another question is for the overall risk, can you associate ServiceNow problem and incident management records for a third party, those that are tracked as part of business/IT ops?
Yeah. That related list, might not be visibly available today out of the box, but that connection can definitely be made. And so any activity, task, record associated to a third party, as I mentioned, that third party record is a shared record across the platform. So any association to that parent record can be pulled in to be visible for the third party risk management team. Might take a little config, but the relationship can be created because of the native integration across the platform and that shared third party record.
Awesome. Can you give some recommendations on how you come up with good quality vendor assessment questions?
Generative AI. No, I'm kidding. That's a great question. And it's what Jay and I were talking about just around, and Agile does an amazing job of feeding the platform with content, but it can be sourced from a lot of different areas. There are organizations that internally have specific policies unique to their organization, which lead to the questions they ask of their third parties. But there's also organizations we see take on recommended questionnaires like the SIG or like different regulations out there that might have frameworks around recommended questions and practices. So, not a go here and there's your answer, but depending on the organization, depending on the level of compliance, depending on the availability of out-of-box content with your organization, you can pull from all of those when creating your IRQ or your external assessment. But I think the most popular avenue of initiating that assessment, and Jay, I'd love your feedback here too, is probably around the regulations and making sure and ensuring that your third parties are acting on behalf of the organization and therefore complying to the regulations in which you need to comply to.
Yeah, that's exactly right. A lot of the regulations, internal policy standards, and governance documents are big drivers. And depending on your program, starting with one of those standardized industry accepted questionnaires can be a really good starting point, because it's really it's easy to defend why you're using it as a good starting point. And so, that plus a short supplemental assessment that includes organizationally specific questions, which may be from your regulations, from your policies, standards, control frameworks, and the like, can be a really clean way to do that. It's all about trying to balance some of that to make sure that you get a good response and that you're not aggravating anyone unnecessarily.
So another follow-on question to that was, does the tool include industry-specific regulatory requirements or risks, or is this a growth area? Can you talk a little bit, Shannon, about the out-of-the-box content that's included in this release?
Yeah. I'm going to flip back to the slides really quick just because I have that screenshot there. But the out-of-the-box content, let me switch over here and go back. As you can see, when you review the out-of-the-box content, which lives in the questionnaire library, you can see, not only where it's aiming to be asked, but specifically for those external assessments, you're able to give insight into what specific, or gauge insight into what specific, whether it's location, regulation, this question is covering, but then also the risk area in which you're gaining insight into.
And specific for this audience, I think I know, but HIPAA and things like that are included in some of that content,
yes.
correct?
I believe HIPAA is included, but we can definitely double check on that as well.
Another question, can you configure and adjust risk scoring on external questionnaires?
Oh, from the intelligence providers?
I think maybe we can answer the question both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, for the external providers, yes, absolutely. There's a translation that needs to occur to normalize it to your risk methodology internally. So there's capability to say if something's coming in at a 720. Well, what does that mean to us? And how do we get apple to apple comparison to risk? And then for these questionnaires and those that you may build yourself, absolutely you can build a scoring model, and highly recommend you do that, because that's where you start to put your own organizational spin on what's important to you from a risk perspective. So you may have a higher emphasis on data protection elements, or other components of your program. You can put the appropriate weighting, not only in the questionnaire, but how these third-party risk areas are calculated and how the overall risk value for that third party or engagement is calculated. So,
and back to you again, Jay, does Agile provide SIG content as part of their authority documents?
As part of the authority documents, I'd have to double check, but we have done a mapping between the SIG questionnaires and our regulatory content. So mapping them to the control objectives that we would have within the IRM solution. So that mapping has been done so that you can start to get an appreciation whether a control is implemented, getting a slightly different view on the same data.
Awesome. Can you talk about some of the most common triggers to send out a reassessment and frequency of assessments?
Oh, I would say, and Jay, I'll jump in here. I would say performance, or an external disruptive event, right? We're leaning in sort of to that BCM side of the house, but I think about, for a given supply chain organization, their worst fear, right, is a weather disruption, and then they're up on the news because they, were unable to fill a certain order of supplies. And so I think triggering external assessments of continued service with knowledge of an upcoming weather event, and we've seen so many in this day and age, right? I think every time there's a hurricane, everyone says it's a 100-year hurricane, but it seems Florida, Louisiana, and Texas are getting 100-year hurricanes pretty much every year at this point. So I think external, unavoidable threats are always a reason to trigger, and TPRM can allow for defined rules of triggering, or of course ad hoc triggering. But then I also think, based on performance, and one of my favorite features of the vendor performance application is satisfaction. And so sending the recipients of the service, of the engagement defined by the third party, sending them periodic satisfaction assessments, feedback surveys, if you will, anytime there's a dip in satisfaction or a big delta in the scores, another great reason to reassess and understand, okay, if there was a change in performance, is there a change in risk, right? Because lower performance, lower satisfaction, bigger risk in working with that third party. But Jay, I'll let you answer that as well.
Yeah, I would say in addition to that, things like publicly disclosed breach or security incidents are always a good reason to reassess. Most folks define the reassessment frequency in their third-party risk management standards, and you can base that either on inherent risk or residual, and there's arguments for both. If you're doing net new business, that's going to increase the sensitivity of data shared with the third party. Is another good reason to do a more detailed reassessment. And then, a lot of those external monitoring services as well. So if there's something that's detecting a drop in one of their security areas based on the externally observable information, that could be a really good reason to reassess.
So, the third party due diligence request on the Employee Center is available to all employees natively. Oops, and I'm getting your computer's about to restart. Move that. So with internal requirements, if you do not want that capability, that task to be available to everyone and to be only used by certain team members, maybe it's department heads, managers, whoever it might be, you can configure that access. But natively, if using the Employee Center, that widget around the third-party due diligence request will appear if you're using TPRM and if you're using the Employee Center.
There's a lot of different ways to connect with us and continue the conversation with our risk business unit in our community. There's a lot of content on our YouTube playlist, And as I said, there's many, many community webinars that we do across product and across the risk business unit or with other platform capabilities within the ServiceNow family. So definitely use these links to connect with us. We will be sharing the recording within the community in a short time. So definitely check back for that if you missed something, or get in touch with us if you need further assistance or help. So Jay, Shannon, thank you so much for the insight. It was really great to see the product in action. And I hope that people will be looking forward to the new features and future enhancements as we bring them. So thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.